responsibility for the accuracy, completeness, objectivity, or usefulness in the information presented on our site. We do not endorse any recommendation or opinion made by any member or physician, nor do we advocate for any treatment. You are responsible for your own medical decisions. Now I'm going to turn over the introductions of our speaker to Martha Butterfield, the Program Coordinator of NJCTS. Marty?
Thank you, Kelly, and good evening, everyone. I'd like to introduce tonight's presenter, Gayle Forman, LCSW. Gayle received her undergraduate and graduate degrees from New York University and is a family therapist with a private practice in Denville, New Jersey. She has over 20 years' experience as a psychotherapist working with children and families specializing in the treatment and evaluation of diverse psychological disorders. Her specialties include treatment of ADHD, Tourette syndrome, and depressive and dissociative disorders. Her work in the area of family and couples counseling includes expectations of parenting, relationship dynamics, and the impact that a child with special needs can have on the whole family, parents and siblings. Gayle also leads workshops on how parents can successfully advocate educational rights for their children. So it's with great pleasure that I turn tonight's webinar over to Gayle Forman.
Thank you so much, Marty, and welcome. Before I begin with some of the substance of my presentation, I just want all of you to know that I am the mother of an adult son who has Tourette syndrome. When he was a young child who first developed this bizarre symptoms of this disorder, I went from specialist to specialist looking for an answer. I had already been informed that he had minimal brain dysfunction. Can you imagine how frightening those words were to a 28-year-old mom who was already overwhelmed by the fact that her son just didn't seem to care about the structure of the home? Such words and phrases as, no, mustn't touch, dangerous, what did mommy say? Don't touch that light socket again. Well, it was as though he heard nothing I said. Oh, minimal brain dysfunction, how terrifying those words were. Minimal brain dysfunction is now known as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And that explained his impulsivity, his apparent inability to follow rules. The Tourette symptoms didn't rear their ugly head until he was about 4. Eye blinking, kicking his legs back, arm contortions and neck contortions. Well, nobody knew what caused them. I was told he had seizures, perhaps epilepsy. Ultimately, I diagnosed him myself when he was 7 years old. I read a young mother's story in the Ladies' Home Journal magazine. She told the story of her young son who had been diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. I read symptom after symptom. By this time, my son was riddled with symptoms, and I knew in my heart that this was what was wrong with my child. In those days, from time of onset to time of diagnosis was usually 10 years. Can you imagine that? So few doctors even recognized Tourette's. I just wanted to make sure that those of you out there in computer land knew a little bit about me before I begin to sound so presumptuous as to know what it is like to live with a special needs child. When I first started putting together this presentation, I thought that it would be very important for me to first present what the average family dynamics look like. So bear with me for a little bit. I'm not going to present all that information that I've gathered, but Kelly Tebow from the New Jersey's Tourette Association has gone to a great deal of trouble to put together a PowerPoint presentation to go along with my talk. And the truth is, many of you listening might be interested in all the background and information that I gathered. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of family dynamics. But they will be scrolled on your screen so that if there's any information included that you might find of interest, you can print it out. But I'm not going to stick strictly to that outline at the beginning. I have requested that it be left on the screen for all of you to print if you want to. I will follow the PowerPoint much more closely when I get to the nitty-gritty of the presentation. After all, I do believe that those of you who are listening would rather have examples of situations and some interventions that could be helpful to you when there are difficulties. Family dynamics refers to the ways in which family members relate to one another. Because humans are capable of change and family members take part in different experiences, the dynamics within a family never remain the same. It's important to be aware of the history of the people in the household. People from different families come together to marry and start a new family, but each of those individuals comes with a history from their original family. This plays a part in the family dynamics. We parent the way that our parents raised us, or we parent the opposite of the way that our parents raised us. But children don't come with handbooks. Go buy a toaster oven and see the size of the instruction book that comes along with that. But when it comes to raising children, we're mostly on our own to figure it out. And oh, the shame that comes along with not knowing what to do about a child who has behaviors that don't fit the norm. Parents often are in the closet about not knowing. But not knowing is very normal, to be expected when it comes to things we've never experienced before. Consider family communication as an important aspect of family dynamics. When communication problems exist, conflicting relationships can result. Communication should be open and positively oriented. That is much easier said than accomplished. Each family member has to learn how to communicate effectively. When the topic of the communication is really important, it is necessary to stop whatever it is that you are doing and be together while the conversation takes place, for one person to speak while the other person listens, for the listener to repeat what the other person said. For example, so what you're telling me is, to clarify the information, to be certain nothing is misunderstood. Father to son, we need to talk about your curfew tonight. Oh, come on, Dad, curfew? You're to be home by 11. 11. I hear you, Dad. And what are the rules about missing curfew? I know, Dad. I won't be able to blah, blah, blah. You fill in the blanks. How often do you stop what you were doing to talk to each other or to your children, to hear what each is saying, to be certain to be understood? How often are you cleaning up after dinner in the kitchen and call into your young child to get ready for bed? He's watching his favorite TV show. You call in 3 times. He answers with the usual muttered, okay. Then you go in after about 20 minutes, and there sits your child, fully clothed, watching television, barely aware that you're even there. Then your voice goes up several octaves. Why don't you listen until I get angry with you? Truth be told, if you had stopped cleaning up, gone into the TV room, told your child to get ready for bed, then you would have known if he was doing it as you had asked. You now have the authority to turn off the TV, to take his little hand and help him do the right thing, whatever your request is. From the kitchen, with walls, not the emotional kind, but actual walls between you, you really don't know if any action is taken at all. And this is just the simplest example of why communicating face-to-face really matters. Let me give you a case example of a father and daughter who were struggling to be able to have a conversation with each other. The girl was about 15 years old and a sophomore in high school. Just mentioning that she's a high school student should bring back memories for all of you. And if you happen to be the parent of a high school student, well, need I say more? So, there they were, sitting on the sofa in my office, she on one end of the sofa, he on the other. I was already thinking that the fact that the two of them were sitting on the same piece of furniture was a really good start. So, Dad began. There was something he wanted to discuss with his daughter. So soft-spoken and cautiously, the dad began to tell his daughter what he had on his mind. He barely got a couple of sentences out when she responded, already furious with him about what he was saying to her. I have to admit right here, I was flabbergasted. I wondered what she was so angry with her dad about. What I heard him say to her had absolutely nothing to do with what she was shouting at him about. Now, clinically, the following scenario would never have happened had I not had a long-standing relationship with this family. I never would have been so arrogant as to interfere in the way that I did. But I did have a relationship with them, so I held up my hands, palms towards each of them, and asked them to hold on for a moment. They did. Whew. They each looked at me to see what was going to happen next. I said to the girl, I'm not quite sure exactly why you're so angry at your father. Do you mind if I ask him a question? Is that okay with you? She nodded. I turned to her dad and asked, is what your daughter's so angry about connected in any way at all to what you said to her? Because what she's saying doesn't seem to me to be related to what you said to her. Would you please tell her again what it was you were starting to say? I looked at the daughter for confirmation that this would be acceptable to her, while her father waited another moment quietly. Again, she nodded. I told her to take a deep breath and to hold on for another minute. I turned back to her dad and asked him if he would repeat what he started to say to his daughter. He began to repeat his statement, looking right at her, while she looked right at me, perhaps for comfort. I asked her to look at him and listen carefully. He continued with what it was he had begun saying. She had a very vague smile on her face. I knew at that moment that she was hearing something different than the first time. When he finished, I asked her if there was anything she wanted to say to her dad about what he just said. She shook her head, saying softly, no. Okay, I interjected. What would have happened if the two of you were at home when this happened? The daughter bravely began and admitted that she would have continued shouting at her dad about something he never said. He stated that he would have gotten more and more angry at his daughter's lack of respect. Neither of them would have considered what the topic was. They were aware that the fight would have ensued and that ultimately the daughter would have been grounded. So I want all of you out there listening to think long and hard about situations in your lives where this kind of thing happens. How often are there misunderstandings that turn into major explosions, misunderstandings that have absolutely nothing to do with the conversation? How often do you not get to discuss what the original topic was meant to be? How often do you not even notice in the moment that it's happening? So communication is something we all do each and every day in every single aspect of our lives. Yet my guess is that the communication is often not really very productive. So let me specify some rules of effective communication. Be sure that whomever it is you are speaking with is listening. If you need to speak to anyone about an important or sensitive subject, be sure that he is not too angry or too distracted. Generally, it's advisable to actively check out your listener's readiness by asking, can you listen to me now? If your spouse or child responds no, you can ask when he thinks he will be ready to listen to you. While this may postpone you being able to speak, it will improve your chances of being heard when you finally do get the floor. Begin with something positive. Whenever you need to have a serious discussion with anyone, it's always best to begin with something positive. You must be sincere and not use artificial praise as a form of manipulation. People automatically become defensive when they hear someone beginning with negatives, such as criticism or complaints. Don't attack. Attacks are indictments that are leveled like criminal charges in a court of law. They are pronounced in a self-righteous tone which almost always elicits defensiveness. Attacks tend to begin with you statements such as you are, or you never, or you always. The best way to avoid attacking your spouse or your child is to try to frame your comments using I statements to express your feelings. Be really careful not to say things like, I think you are. Make sure you're talking about how you feel about what you want to talk about. Don't exaggerate. Exaggeration is one way in which we vent our feelings when we're upset. This may relieve our inner tension, but it doesn't do much to promote family or marital harmony. Once your spouse hears any slight exaggeration on your part, he will feel fully justified in rejecting everything you have to say. Therefore, words such as always and never should be eliminated. Do not mind read. Many people like to play amateur psychologist and figure out what others are thinking. If we assume, however, that our estimates of our spouse or child's motives are completely accurate, we run the risk of inflaming tempers at home. You don't really care about me. You knew that would upset me. I know you don't really mean what you just said, are all examples of provocative, mind-reading statements. Focus on preferences, not principles. So often, kids or spouses pretend that their feelings are not nearly as important as the principle involved. As they argue, they desperately try to convince each other that they're right. While you may believe that you are strengthening your arguments, you are, in fact, weakening them. It would be much more productive if you would speak about your feelings. You can dispute someone's philosophy much more easily than you can his feelings. Explain what made you feel the way you did. People often mistakenly assume that their feelings are universal. They think such thoughts as, anyone would feel the way I did. It's so important to explain exactly what you feel so that your partner understands. Simply to recount the disturbing events and let the tale speak for itself never gets anywhere. That's a serious mistake, actually. If you don't explain in the most specific language possible exactly how you felt, your spouse or your child will not understand what bothered you. Also, clarify what your needs are. You will not be able to get what you want from your family members unless you're able to articulate exactly what your needs are. You have to tell your spouse or your kids not only what bothers you, but also what you would have wanted done differently. Limit yourself to one or two topics, preferably one at a time. Family members sometimes find that they have accumulated a long laundry list of complaints and grievances. This is very dangerous. Or do you already hear that in your heads? When each one finally gets his or her turn to be the speaker, he or she often tries to address way too many subjects all at the same time. Let's talk a little bit about sibling rivalry. Let me state the obvious. It's critical for parents to spend quality time with each of the children in the household. When there is a child in the family with special needs, it becomes very difficult to find time for each of the children in the home. Generally, the identified child demands so much time and emotional energy, it becomes very difficult for the parents involved just to find both the physical and emotional energy to sit with another child when there are free moments. When the parents have a moment or two free and the house is quiet, the last thing they usually want to do is spend time with one of the quiet children. Just sit, breathe, have a moment. But if other children do not get attention in positive ways, they will create situations where they will get your attention in ways that are not so good for the family or even for the child's self-worth. In one case that I had, the youngest of 3 children was born with many medical problems. The mother in this family wanted to spend time with the baby, as much time as she possibly could, because the baby's prognosis was very poor. The husband of this woman felt that she should spend much more time with him and with their 2 older children who were healthy. The other 2 children were young and had not presented any problems at all. The mother was very torn, knowing that the other 2 children were in need of her time and love, but also knowing that her time with the baby might be limited. There are some very disturbing statistics that couples who have a child or children with any kinds of neurological or medical problems are nearly twice as likely to divorce or separate in comparison to couples who do not have children with any of these complications. So the line was drawn in the sand here, and this mother was pulled in two very distinct and important directions, towards the baby and towards her husband and their two other children. Did this affect the marriage? For sure. Can they still make it? This couple can. They love each other and are very committed to be married forever. Their marriage is important to them, but having a child who was very ill took a serious toll, at least for several months until some changes were made. All right, so that's an example of how the beginnings of serious marital problems can start. It's an example of what can happen when parents are not in agreement with how to divide their time amongst their children. It's critical that parents, in spite of their exhaustion, find the time to spend with each of their children. It's necessary for each child to feel important. So play a game for 15 minutes. Read a book with each of the children alone, just the two of you. Take a walk with one of the other children, one at a time. It's good exercise for both of you. Color. Do crafts together. Look at the big picture. 15 minutes with one of the other children daily versus a lifetime of serious ramifications caused by a neglected child. Signs that will help you notice that the other children in the home might be in trouble. Well, he might become withdrawn. Why bother trying to get attention from my parents? Obviously, I'm not as important as my brother or my sister. Nobody cares about me. I must not be worthy of their time. I'm just not good enough. Dealing with misperceptions and emotional responses begins with fostering communication. Try to be a good listener. Encourage siblings to express themselves, including negative feelings. Allow them to tell you how difficult it is to have a brother who has, for example, Tourette's syndrome, how the other kids at school tease his brother, how that embarrasses him. Don't try to explain how difficult it is for his big brother. Don't tell him that he needs to understand that his brother can't help it. Let him vent. He's entitled to feel however he feels. It's not his job to be the parent. Yes, you do want to teach him to be compassionate and understand, but he's still entitled to have whatever feelings he has. And for sure, it's not easy to be the sibling of a child who is different from the norm. Not only does the identified child stand out, but the other children in the family have to deal with how their sibling is treated. Does he need to punch somebody at the playground for making fun of his brother? Should he throw sand in someone's face? Should he join in on the teasing, and maybe then the other kids will think he's cool? Imagine how many decisions a young child, the sibling of a neurologically impaired child, has to make, decisions that are outside the realm of the norm for children to even have to consider. Ask them what they like best and least about each other. Let your children know it's okay to get mad at their special needs sibling and not to feel guilty if they sometimes resent the extra attention. The siblings didn't ask to be in this situation any more than you did. And let's face it, you are struggling to accept this predicament, to come to terms with how your life has changed so dramatically, with pressures for which you were never prepared, with painful disappointments at the missing dreams and hopes for your children and family. One way to combat misperceptions is to describe to the children their siblings' special needs or abilities, starting with simple explanations around ages 5 or 6. Share with them how a health condition is evaluated and treated and what to expect. Talk about their siblings' strengths and weaknesses and the best ways to interact with that child. It's important to have special needs children do as much for themselves as they can and assign them tasks so everybody has responsibilities. Do chores together as a family. As parents, it's your responsibility to help this child to become as independent and responsible as is possible, considering whatever the deficits might be. I know it's in your hearts to make life easier for your child with special needs, but his life will be easier the more he is able to care for himself, the more independent he can be as he grows up. Try to set siblings up to cooperate rather than compete. For instance, by having them race against the clock as a team rather than individually. Such an easy idea, right? Kids just love beating that timer. By the way, be careful who has custody of the timer. If you have it, at least you're in charge of how much time is on it. Let each child know he or she is special. Make sure they're able to develop their own interests and identity. Try to get a few minutes a day alone between each parent and child. Exclusive time with parents will be especially valuable to the sibling of the special needs child. Don't overburden older children with care duties for their siblings. However, all siblings of the special needs child can be enlisted as partners with parents in understanding and addressing their siblings' requirements. If sibling rivalry gets out of hand or parents see signs of depression or anxiety, counseling may be in order for children or the family. Signs to watch for include sleep or appetite disturbance, hopelessness, poor concentration, low self-esteem, talk of hurting oneself, loss of interest in activities, frequent crying or worrying, difficulty separating from parents, perfectionism, or what can be physical symptoms of emotional distress, such as headaches or stomach aches. If you see these behaviors for more than a few weeks, seek counseling. Sibling support groups can connect children with others who have similar experiences. Despite the potential problems, being the sibling of a special needs child can have pluses too. Research indicates they're more likely to develop such positive traits as maturity, social competence, ability to get along with others, insight, empathy, tolerance of differences between people, pride in family accomplishments, and loyalty. They have more negative issues to deal with, but they have opportunity for personal growth and character development. Another case example. I worked with a family of 4, the mother and father and 2 sons, one 9 and the other 6. The 9-year-old was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and oppositional defiant disorder. Quite the triple threat, right? The reality for this family was that the 9-year-old ran the household. With his loud voice, children with neurological disorders often speak much louder than we wish they would. With his provocative behaviors, with his tantrums. Let's call the children Eric and Howard. Eric certainly was a child who was impossible to ignore. And to add to his difficulties, he had diarrhea of the mouth, which is often a symptom of children diagnosed with ADHD. By the way, it's also a characteristic of a lot of people who have no diagnosis at all. Anyone out there relate to that? Howard, the one without the diagnosis. Doesn't everybody have a diagnosis of some sort? Grew to be outgoing, popular, and athletic. While Eric, the one with TS and ADHD and ODD, was an excellent student and very outgoing. Don't people with diarrhea of the mouth appear to be outgoing? But he was not athletic, and he didn't have friends. So there was already a setup for the brothers to not do well together. Eric resented his brother, probably primarily because Howard didn't have Tourette, didn't have problems controlling his body, didn't make noises, didn't get stared at in public. But to add to these problems, Howard had lots of friends and could play almost any sport he chose to play. So the father, let's call him Stephen, and the mother, let's call her Marilyn, really had their hands full. Not the family either of them had planned to raise for sure. So Marilyn and Stephen fought constantly over Eric. Eric and Howard fought constantly over nothing. And the family became extremely dysfunctional. Marilyn always interfered when Stephen attempted to discipline either of the boys. In his mind, discipline was screaming at them, threatening them, and punishing them. Marilyn would try to intervene all the time. By her very act of attempting to save the boys from him, she was teaching them that they didn't have to listen to their father, that she would always give them attention even though it was negative attention when they misbehaved to their father. Get the picture? The main point of this lengthy description of this family is for all of you to know that, violent behavior notwithstanding, it's important for each parent to handle their own difficulties with their children. Moms, stay away from your husbands when they are handling the misbehavior of your child. To interfere is to hamper the relationship these children will have with their father. And in the best of all households, it would be good for parents to talk about how they want to handle disciplining the children. Talk about the subject away from the presence of the children, not in the middle of a problem. Nobody is capable of listening very well when the problem is beginning or escalating. So, does all of this information seem to be swirling around in your head? Do your days often feel like you're drowning in quicksand? What can you do when you feel as though your legs are in quicksand and you are quickly being pulled down? If you fight the quicksand, for certain you will lose the battle. Quicksand can win out over the fight we human beings give it every time. Maybe if somebody would throw us a lifeline, that would be helpful. So if you're in a family that consists of two parents, it's important for you to be able to speak to your partner for help, for you to leave the house when things are feeling overwhelming, if your mate is willing to take over. Call a friend or relative if you're a single parent. Call a university that has a pediatric nursing program or a special education department. Those places are often wonderful places to search for a sitter for your children, someone who is already looking to work with children who are anything but average. Children with special needs. Couples need to spend time away from the household, just the two of them, to give them an opportunity to connect, to talk, to relax and be adults in a different role. It isn't easy to keep a marriage intact when there are problems such as these. Actually, it isn't easy to keep a marriage intact no matter what. So time together away from the family is an important prescription for success. Oh, my son, he's an adult, a college graduate, has had a job with the same company for close to 15 years now, has lived independently since he was 9 years old. He's probably one of the best people I know. But when he was a child, I certainly didn't know that someday, like today, he would grow up to be so many wonderful things. He seemed so damaged. Perhaps it was I who was so damaged when he was young. And raising him was the hardest thing that I have ever done. I wasn't certain that I would survive the ordeal. Every day was such a struggle. He had more energy than 5 children in a room. I couldn't compete with that. But I hung in there, talked with other parents, read lots of books, asked many questions, and ultimately went to grad school so that I could be part of the solution for other families who were struggling. So hang in there. Talk to other families in similar situations. Go for therapy if you think it'll help. Join support groups. Listen to webinars. But don't give up. Make sure you have some time for yourself. Learn how to breathe, deep cleansing breaths, and use your breathing daily. If you don't know how to do this, it sounds so simple, but all breathing is not the same. Imagine that. Learn how to use this breathing. It will help you to relax. It will center you. It will keep you present. It will be one coping mechanism that you can grab right on the spot to help yourself to calm down so you can start whatever crisis you are having from the beginning, again and again and again, without having to run to the gym or leave the house to run around a track. Take care of you, for you are the backbone of this family, and you will make all the difference in the world in the end. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for listening. And I'll be happy to take your questions now.
Gayle, thank you. Before we get into the Q&A, and there's been questions coming in fast and furious, I want to go back to something you said just for clarification.
Sure.
You mentioned your son, and you said he's been living alone, I think is how you phrased it, since he was 9 years old. So I just want to make sure that you didn't move him out, that he was 19.
I did 19.
That's what I thought, but I just
went to college, and he had his own place when he went away to college. No, I never did throw him out. We survived it. We're great friends.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I was sure that's what you meant, but I did want to just clarify that for the record.
I appreciate it. I don't want DICES trying to take him away. They wouldn't want him at his age. Thank you.
Okay, now, question about stress and anxiety levels as a parent. How does a parent take care of their own stress and anxiety when they have a special needs child?
Well, I think taking a time out for ourselves is really important. So we teach our children that when we don't like how they're acting, we put them in time out. And while we often use that as a time for ourselves to catch a breath, we use it as a means to punish them, and it's really not meant to be that. It's really meant to be an opportunity for the child to sit down and think about what he did wrong and what to do better next time. So I think as parents, we should learn to take times out for ourselves. So if we can sit down, I used to sit on the steps going upstairs, and I would say, "Don't talk to Mommy, I need a time out," which kind of amused them. They thought it was pretty funny. But it's a role modeling technique. It gives you an opportunity to take a couple of breaths where you're not interacting with your child. Breathing, I think, is the best gift you can give yourself, not just the daily breathing that we do, but learning how to take deep breaths and calm yourself down. It's been researched that if we take deep breathing and really breathe diaphragmatically, it slows down our blood pressure, it slows down our heart rate. So it's the best thing we can do for ourselves when we're anxious. So if you don't know how to do it, there are articles online. I'm sure you could Google deep breathing and it will teach you how to do it. Practice it every day. Practice it at red lights while you're driving. But know how to do it because it's the best friend you will have for your whole life while you're raising the children. Deep breaths for anxiety and even for depression.
Okay, good. Good advice. How do I take care of my marriage as a parent of a special needs child? My spouse and I sometimes take our frustration out on each other, and how can we maintain open communication and appreciation?
Yeah, that's the hardest thing to do in any family. So throwing a child into the mix that has special needs makes it really difficult. One of the things that I said that I think is so important is to find somebody who can take the children off your hands, even if it's for a half hour, for you to go have a cup of coffee, to get out and connect with each other away from the children. Having said that, we can't always get out of the house. I think it's really important for each partner in the couple to sit down together in the evening after the kids are asleep, or quiet at least, and look at each other, have a cup of tea, and sit there and have a conversation that has absolutely nothing to do with the children. Sit there, talk about your day that has nothing to do with the children, talk about the weather, talk about a book, but look at each other, get a chance to connect. You really need to do that. It is hard not to take your frustrations out on each other.
Okay, more good advice. In the information on our website that was advertising this webinar, you referred to something there, and unless I missed it here, I'm not sure. You referred to something called secondary gain.
Okay.
And so can you talk a little bit about that and exactly what that is and what that means?
So secondary gain is a child getting a gain from what's going on between you and your child that you did not intend for him to get. So he's misbehaving, and you get in the middle of his misbehaving and you try to calm him down. But during the time you're calming him down, you're hugging him and you're stroking him, and you're doing things that mommies do innately with their children when they're upset. But if he's throwing a fit, he is now learning, this is the secondary gain part, he is now learning that if he throws a fit, you'll come and do all the things that he loves you to do. So if you're trying to calm down an out-of-control child, it's not good to do the same thing that you do when you're acting in a loving way with him. I don't think you should do bad things. You have to learn how to quiet your child down in ways that don't resemble the affection that you give him, or he will learn that no matter what he does, he can get affection. That would be the secondary gain.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Can you give an example of a conversation that is about feelings rather than principle?
Okay, sure. Principles. Oh, a great example of that, and I will not make a political statement, I promise, would be the Republicans versus the Democrats. Those are principles. Feelings would be, excuse me, I'm really upset about something and I need to tell you why. Such and such happened between us earlier today and I was really hurt. In no way can you get to the point where you say, you made me feel, because nobody can make us feel anyway. We feel how we feel. We own the feelings. They are ours. So we have to learn to make I statements. I feel that I was really upset when such and such happened earlier today. So keep it on yourself. And then when you're finished with it, your child, your partner, can then respond with another I statement. They're really hard to learn how to do. I would bet that 90% of the people in my office, when I say make an I statement, they are so upset about something. They say, I feel that you're an idiot. So it goes right back on the other person. You have to keep the topic on yourself.
Okay, so it's not like about pointing the finger and making somebody wrong. It's how you feel.
And it isn't, you can't ever be wrong with how you feel. You feel how you feel. They may not have meant for you to feel that way, but that's how you feel, and you own that. And nobody can ever say you're wrong about how you feel. You feel your feelings. They're yours.
Okay, good. Thank you. What's the best way for a school professional to work with parents who disagree about what their special needs child requires?
Oh, I think that's a whole seminar all by itself.
Well, we may have to just invite you back, Gayle.
Thanks.
But could you touch on that? Could you touch on that a little bit?
Sure. It's really hard because often the school has a different idea about how to handle the child than you do. And the truth is the classroom is much more structured than the house is. And so some of what they do in the classroom might be different, but it's very important for the professionals dealing with your child to fully understand the implications of whatever the disorder is. So sometimes teachers will call on the phone and tell the parents, this is what happened in school today. Your child misbehaved. I want you to do something about that. That may not be the words that the teachers use, but in the end they're reporting it to the parents. That's a lot like saying when your father gets home, he's really going to give it to you. So I think schools need to handle the difficulties that they have at the moment they occur, but there needs to be conversations between the parents and the teachers about how that will transpire. It's not always easy to take a hyperactive kid who's climbing the walls. You can't touch those children when they're in the classroom. You have to find ways to deal with that. And you may have suggestions at home with how you deal with it. I also think behavior modification is such a useful tool in a classroom. And at home, too, by the way. I think it's a really good thing to do. If you don't know what that is, maybe you can find that online easily. But it's about charts, and it's about rewarding positive behavior, paying less attention to negative behavior. If you can get the teacher of your child to be following a similar pattern, or vice versa, if the teacher has a pattern that's working in the classroom and you can start to do that at home, then you're working together, and there's a better chance the child can go forward.
Okay, so what you're saying then is that you really need to, it seems that the teacher and probably the mom, but the parents in any event, need to be in communication then.
Definitely. And today it's so much easier because teachers don't need to call parents and not get answers in the house. Teachers have computers. They can write notes to each other on the computers. So they don't even have to get to the telephone, which can sometimes be really lengthy. So it's really important to communicate. It's very important for you to share ideas about what works so that maybe you can both be on the same page in how you handle the child.
Okay. We've had a couple of questions, kind of in some of this you touched on, but some attendees are looking for a little bit more elaboration on it. The relationship between the child and, in this case, with TS and siblings who don't have the TS, and the sibling, the non-TS kid, or the non-child with any, the child that doesn't have any neurological problems, often feels that he's not getting attention or focus from his parents. And that idea of managing that conversation in the house, I know you touched on it a little bit, and could you expand on that a little bit more?
Sure. If I understand you, you want me to talk about how to handle the children who don't have the TS.
Yeah, yeah, and how to deal with them feeling left out or, you know.
Okay. So it's really
insignificant is maybe a way to look at it.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
They're feeling insignificant in the household because they've got this other sibling. They've got this sibling that, you know, really has a problem.
And it's really a setup for the child who doesn't have a problem to either, I started talking about it, to withdraw and get really quiet because it doesn't seem how much noise they make. It doesn't get noticed because TS children are kind of front and center when they have serious symptoms. So it's really important that the other child or children in the house understand about the TS, know what it's about, but don't have to mimic that. They don't have to look like that. They really need to have an identity of their own. So it's important, and God knows where you're going to get the strength and the time to do this. It's really important for the other children to have identities, so that maybe they're in Scouts, or maybe they like to do art, or maybe they go to a community center and swim. That might give you some free time because they have swimming lessons. You may have to get them there, but it's a really good sport because it's not competitive with anybody else unless they're on a team. But it's very important to give that child the ability to be his own person. He doesn't need to learn to take care of his siblings' difficulties. If I go back to when my children were little, I never knew this when they were growing up. It's shocking what we don't know if we don't ask. But my younger son always felt he had to defend his older brother because the kids would tease him. And they're almost 4 years apart. That's a lot of days, a lot of years between them. And I never knew that till they were both adults. And so we really need to talk to the other children and find out what's going on in their lives and help them find things that they love to do. We need to spend time with them. That is so important. If they know that while you're going through X, Y, Z with the identified child in the house, the one that has whatever the problem is, if they know that when it quiets down a little bit, you're going to come into their room and they can read together, or you can color, or you can play a game with them. If they know that's coming down the line, they have reason to try really hard to cooperate through whatever the situation is. More information? Do you need more information about that?
I think that's good. And actually, so kind of holding out that carrot, if you will,
yes,
to the other child, to know that they're going to get some time with mom and dad or dad at the end of the day. It gives them some reason to kind of hang in there.
Yes, and that really is behavior modification. It's really about if you do the right thing for the next half hour when I'm finished with your sister or brother, I'm going to come into your room. So it's parents often tell me they hate the idea of rewarding good behavior. They don't like the idea it feels like a bribe. And I always tell them, you go to work and you get a paycheck. That's not a bribe. So if your child works really hard for a half an hour to keep his behavior in line so that at 8 o'clock you're coming into his room and you're going to play with him. I'm sorry I keep using the male adjective. You can tell I have sons, right? The male pronoun.
Right.
So if you go in, if he knows that at 8 o'clock you're all his, it may mean switching off. It may mean somebody else has to take care of the other child. Also, the identified child with the problem, maybe something special is waiting for him while the younger one is getting some special time.
Okay, good. Thanks for elaborating. Got a question here about divorce. And so what's the best way to tell your children you're divorcing? Not, for everybody's benefit. And that both children, that the children will see both parents. Can you touch on that a little bit? And it's further complicated if you've got a child with some special needs.
It certainly is. In the best of all worlds, it would be really good if the two parents can have a discussion after they've made this decision, a discussion together about how they're going to tell the children. Not surprisingly, children feel it coming very often because of what's going on in the household. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes parents are able to hold it together and they make a decision based on stuff that the children don't know. So to sit down with the children and to tell them the truth. So children always blame themselves. The world revolves around them, so they're going to think it's their fault. And so you have to reassure them that the divorce has nothing to do with them, that mommy is always going to be mommy and daddy is always going to be daddy. And whatever plans you make on how the visitation is going to evolve, you can talk about that. Hopefully you can settle that before you have the first conversation. But it's very important for the kids to know that this isn't their fault. It isn't that you didn't make your bed in the morning and daddy's really angry and so he left. Kids will not tell you things like that. They don't tell you because they blame themselves and they're afraid they're going to get in trouble. So you have to tell them as much as you can tell them for their age group, and then let them know that you love them and that they're always going to be their parents and that they can always come to both of you and that you're always going to be a family, because you are always going to be a family. It's just a different way to identify the family now.
Okay. And actually, I think we're down to our last question. And this one, we're looking for some ideas. Oh, wait a minute, wrong one. Let me just find the right one. Talking to a child who does not have special needs about his or her sibling that does, what are some developmentally appropriate or creative ways of addressing that?
It so depends on the age of the child. It really does. You should get a book on normal child development so you know what to say, because if the younger child is maybe 3 or 4, it really is time that you can give them some information about what's going on in the household. And you tell them using language that they understand, but whole truths. You have to make it really clear that if they're not going to get it, you want to let them know they're not contagious. Now, if there's a chance the other child could get it, you don't bring it up at all, because they might not get it. And so you don't bring it up as something for them to be worried about, but you tell them at each level of age as much as they need to know. It's really good to let them ask you questions. I think that children respond better if they ask a question to us and we tell them what they want to know. So we may start the conversation by saying, I think I want to talk to you a little bit about your brother or your sister, because there's some things that you might not understand. So before you tell them anything, you might say, is there anything you want to ask me? And they might come out and say, I notice he blinks his eyes all the time. Why does he do that? And he may be done at the end of that. So you don't have to give them a lot of information at one sitting. You've got a lifetime.
Yes, yes, you're absolutely right. I was distracted by another question that popped up. I'm sorry, but I think we've got time for this one because I think it's quite good. This is a situation where there are sons with learning disabilities early on in their academic life. And I'm assuming this is the mom. Yeah, the mom senses that her spouse kind of blames her for not cueing in to these disabilities early on. So it's created this kind of gap. And any suggestions on how best to manage that? And it would seem to me, it's something that you've touched on a little bit, but I think it falls into the communication area.
Definitely. And it's really important not to point fingers. In the end, it really doesn't matter who started it, whose family has the gene. It really doesn't matter. What matters is two parents who can come together, not blaming the other one, because when we blame someone else, that takes the blame off of us. Mm-hmm. The important thing is to find out and identify what the problem is and find out what to do about it. It's really important for parents to know that learning disabilities have absolutely nothing to do with intelligence. Einstein was dyslexic. I guess many of you have been told that repeatedly already if your children have learning disabilities. But learning disabilities do not have anything to do with intelligence. It's a different style of learning. And so I've seen kids not get picked up until they hit college, and they start to get programs in college to help overcome learning disabilities. So what matters is that we know today what the problem is and what are we going to do about it. It's not about blaming. And if you can't stop fighting, you may want to seek professional help to learn how to talk to each other, because the blame game doesn't help anybody.
Well, that's well said, and I agree with you 100% on that one. All right, that really is our last question that we have time for tonight, so I'm going to wrap this up and turn the program back over to Kelly. Gayle, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thank you all for joining this webinar on the impact on marriage and family and raising a child with neurological issues. For any questions we may not have gotten to, we will post them on the discussion board, and Ms. Forman will be answering them there. There is an exit survey which should show on your screen as you exit. Please fill out the evaluation on the exit survey. The discussion board is open now and is available for the next 7 days on the NJCTS website for any additional questions that were not covered in tonight's presentation. That website is www.njcts.org. An archived recording of tonight's webinar will also be posted to our website. This ends tonight's webinar. Thank you, Ms. Forman, for your presentation, and thank you, everyone, for attending. Good night.